A major event in the Saturn development program occurred on the second Saturn 1B launch. A critical confirmation that engineers had to make was that in zero-G, the liquid hydrogen propellant could be controlled to allow the J2 engine to restart. Engineers added special instrumentation to this flight, including a camera in the tank that showed the movement of the propellant during flight. Restarting the J2 engine was essential for the lunar injection burn of the larger and later iteration, the Saturn V moon rocket.
Well, I thought Saturn V was a very high-risk operation, and I'm sure the people that did it too. We were talking about riding the Saturn to the moon, and it was powered by hydrogen. And up to that time, the only thing I knew that had hydrogen in it was a Hindenburg. That didn't work out too good. So, so I was really stunned that they could make motors that run liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen together. And of course, we do it now regularly with a space shuttle, and it is an awesome propellant. It really is.
For Saturn V, there was a further expansion of the HOSC. We added a second floor above the existing main conference room, and with a large engineering console room and additional teleconference rooms.
New technology allowed for tables and charts, once posted on corkboards, to now be televised via closed-circuit television to monitors anywhere in the HOSC. Although a simple-sounding task today, at the time, this operation took the might of Marshall's mainframe computer for the duration of the launch activity. What had to happen was to take the downlink data and convert it into a visually meaningful analog or television display. The leaf board was expanded. Physical space was still limited, so trailers were placed outside the west entrance. These were to house a team that studied the winds the rocket would encounter during ascent and as sleeping quarters for personnel during extended operations. The Saturn V was unprecedented in its complexity, and thus the instrumentation was orders of magnitude greater than ever before. The methodical rocket team at Marshall always preferred to test one stage in flight, perfect it, then work on the next stage and then the next. The dwindling timetable for the Saturn V moon launch didn't allow for that. The deadline loomed near. There was no time to waste. Spear's idea for the HOSC was making a lot of sense.
The idea was to save time by avoiding unnecessary launch delays.
So the first flight of the Saturn V used what became known as the all-up concept. Test it all at once. The vehicle was designated 501, and for its practice countdown, it kept all up for days.
I guess one of the most dramatic things to me in the whole history of the HOSC was the countdown demonstration test for 501, the first Saturn V. I think we ran that thing 5 times and trying to prove that we could really get that thing ready for launch. And it was really joyous in that place the day we got all the way got the countdown all the way to liftoff, to the liftoff signal. It would be. It was just a test. It wasn't a flight. But that was one of the most challenging things I think the HOSC ever really looked at.
That crucial test was a tremendous step toward meeting the national goal on time. But also legendary among the people who have worked here is the story of what happened next.
After the long countdown for Saturn 501, which went on for days, we finally completed it, and everybody was exhausted. Dr. von Braun had come back. He had been to the Cape for it, but couldn't stay for the whole number of days, and so he had come back to Huntsville, and he came over when it was completed to the HOSC and asked to speak to Arthur Rudolph, who was the Saturn V program manager. And so we called down to the blockhouse and got him on the phone. And von Braun, who was a very well-known gentleman, said, "Arthur, this is Werner." And the the fidelity of the voice systems in those days wasn't all that great, but Rudolph says,
"Who is this?" And Von Braun says, "This is Werner." And Rudolph says, "Werner who?"
and Von Braun says, "The man with the money." And Arthur says, "Ah, Werner."
The first actual flight of a Saturn V
We have liftoff. We have liftoff.
proved that, yes indeed, America could launch the huge moon rocket. The second flight, or Saturn 502, offered up new challenges as two engines failed on the way up. The mission was, however, completed, in part due to the Marshall Flight Control Team, which had been established as an integral part of the Mission Control Center in Houston. The engine failures were not the only problem with 502. There were other technical bugs that had to be worked out as well. Alex McCool participated in a NASA meeting where the Flight 502 fixes were discussed and a very confident decision was made.
Well, we pretty much convinced everybody for the next one's going to be 503 or Apollo 8, okay? Can we man it? And then even on top of that, go around the moon.
When we decided to go to the moon on Apollo 8, which was originally an Earth orbital mission trying to check out both spacecraft, it was perhaps one of the boldest moves that NASA management had to take. The first two flights of the Saturn V unmanned had problems. When we discovered that the lunar module was not going to be ready for our Earth orbital flight, and that we also knew from intelligence that the Russians might be putting a man around the moon in late 1968, the move to say, let's send the command service module to the moon was very, very critical. And one of the things that the folks at Huntsville had done was to give assurance that the Saturn V, even though they had problems with the first two, would be ready for the first manned flight, that flight on Apollo 8. That was I think, really the turning point in what we call the space race between the Soviet Union and the United States. Bold move, done correctly, Saturn V worked perfectly, and I'm always happy to be on the first flight on that vehicle that went to the moon.
Apollo 8, you're looking good.
The favorite thing for me was when we circumnavigated the moon. And the HOSC was there receiving the data from the S4B second burn, which we retrieved with airplanes. And that was the technology of the day. But seeing the data come back and know that we were on the way. And so that's my greatest memory.
I believe I know why she felt that way. Once you have ignited the S4B for the second time out of orbit and launched into the trajectory of the moon, you were pretty much committed to that trajectory. There was no way to turn that around.
It was the first to get that ignition. And so everybody was confident but watching, and there was a lot of hollering when we got full thrust on that engine.
Apollo 8, you are go for TLI, over. Roger, understand, we're go for TLI.
Very, very critical. The engines had to work, and on Apollo 8, being the very first flight to the moon, and when the S4B was fired for the second time on the far side of the Earth away from the moon to get us all the way to the moon, very, very critical. It was the first time we had gone past the velocities of Earth orbit or the altitudes of Earth orbit. And the three of us sitting there and seeing the velocities continue to creep faster and faster and faster.
Okay, we got Seco right on the money. Roger, understand Seco.
And then all of a sudden we shut down, and when we turned the vehicle around, we saw the Earth starting to really shrink. You could see it going like going into a tunnel, looking at the back end of the tunnel as it got smaller and smaller. So that was the critical phase, and especially on Apollo 8, the very first flight.